Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a fascinating linguistic mystery that treats ancient writing like a giant puzzle box just waiting to be unlocked. We're looking at a text that proposes a rather astonishing theory about the very origins of written language. Specifically, it traces the roots of Chinese characters back to, of all things, a global cataclysm.
So what connects ancient Chinese writing to the biblical Great Flood? Well, the source text we're exploring today presents an incredible hypothesis. It suggests that the everyday characters written by millions of people across the globe might actually contain a hidden historical record of a global deluge. It essentially asks us to consider the idea that ancient scribes didn't just invent abstract shapes, but actually encoded the literal survival story of humanity right into the ink.
Section 1. The Global Flood Memory. To really understand this theory, we first have to look at how ancient cultures all around the world share these collective, scattered stories of a catastrophic deluge. The author argues that because these stories are so widely dispersed, it compounds the likelihood that the entire world suffered together from the exact same event, and that descendants of the survivors carried this memory with them as they spread across the earth.
But hey, before we can decode the mystery, we kind of need our decoder ring, right? We need to understand that Chinese ideograms are essentially visual equations made of smaller pictorial building blocks called radicals. You don't just memorize a random shape. You combine concepts. It's literally visual math. Once we grasp how these radicals stack together to build meaning, the hypothesis presented in our source material suddenly comes into very sharp focus.
Section 2. Decoding the word for boat. Let's start with a seemingly ordinary, everyday word and see how the source text breaks down its oddly specific composition. According to the text, if we take the radical for vessel, add the number 8, and then add the radical for mouth, which is commonly used to represent people, we get the modern character for boat. So, vessel plus 8 plus people equals boat.
The author points out this very specific visual equation and asks a pivotal question. Why exactly 8 people on a vessel? I mean, a basic skiff might hold 2, a larger ship might hold 20. Why is the fundamental concept of a boat inextricably linked to the number 8 in this ancient calligraphy?
Well, the source posits that this number isn't random at all. It specifically references the biblical account of Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. That makes exactly 8 survivors of the Genesis flood account. The text argues that this character for both tells the story of the first great ark, which according to tradition had precisely 8 passengers.
Section 3. Words of water and ruin. Once we establish this 8 survivors formula, the text applies it to more complex words associated with the deluge itself.
Let's look at the absolutely incredible visual math the source uses to decode the character for to drown. According to the text, you start with united, add hands joined, which suggests a confederacy or people banding together. Then you add the radical for cover over, and finally the radical for water. All of these elements unite to form the character for to drown or submerged.
You can see how these concepts are visually stacked to create a miniature narrative. It's not just a basic symbol for a person underwater. The author argues it portrays a story of united people joining hands to escape, only to be entirely covered over by the rising waters. It's a remarkably evocative breakdown of a single written word.
So, the crucial point is how the text then breaks down the word for flood itself. It starts again with that critical number 8. It adds hands joined over the earth to form a character meaning total or altogether. This implies the 8 people were the total remaining population. Finally, adding water to this symbol gives us the character for flood or vast. The text asserts this ideograph reveals a massive truth. The flood involving these 8 people was total, encompassing the whole earth.
The author even highlights the word for to hand down, continue, or to follow a course. Notice the components here. The number 8, the symbol for mouth or people, and water. The text interprets this as the 8 persons floating on the water, representing the sole survivors who handed down tradition, history, and knowledge from the old world right into the new.
Section 4. Life after the deluge. The source material doesn't just stop at the flood itself, though. It argues that this 8 motif totally permeated the language used to describe rebuilding life afterward.
For instance, the text suggests that because the survivors' world had been washed away and there were literally no trees left to build with, they likely lived in caves. Thus, the word for cave is composed of a roof over the number 8. And what about the word for empty? Well, the author shows it's the character for cave combined with the character for work. It literally means the 8 people had left the cave to go to work in the fields, leaving nobody home.
This brilliantly illustrates how the author tracks the 8 progenitors of this newly desolate world. The hypothesis asserts that as this family adapted, the Chinese language naturally incorporated these 8 specific ancestors into characters descriptive of their harsh new conditions.
Section 5. Rebuilding an Ancient Society. Finally, the text expands this hidden code theory to the foundational words of commerce and human interaction.
The hypothesis moves at a rapid pace here. It claims the word for public or common to all is simply 8 plus person, referring to the common ancestors of the New World population. Division is represented by 8 and a knife, symbolizing the original 8 family members using a knife to symbolically divide their possessions or lands after living together in the Ark.
Even the word for speak, tell, or say is decoded by the author. It combines 8, older brother, and words. The source speculates this grew out of the lengthy exchange of words necessary in business affairs among the spreading descendants, perhaps with an older brother initially acting as the spokesman for the original family of 8.
The ultimately draws a bold conclusion. None of this was an accident. To quote the author directly, consequently, it would be natural for the inventor of the Chinese characters to incorporate essential facts regarding the deluge and the human remnant of 8 people into a newly developing calligraphy. The source strongly argues that these ancient inventors purposefully memorialized their authentic historical reality directly into the DNA of their new writing system to preserve it for millennia. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the words we use in a totally new light. Whether you view the author's analysis as a literal historical record encoded by ancient survivors, or just an absolutely incredible, fascinating linguistic coincidence, it leaves us with a pretty compelling thought. Are the shapes we sketch out on paper, the characters we type on our screens every single day, secretly carrying the oldest, most dramatic stories of humanity hidden right in plain sight?